Ever since its beginning, the Jedi Order struggled with the dark side. It was born out of conflict with Darksiders in the Force Wars of Tython, and fought the legions of Leto, a group of Dark Jedi, in the first Schism shortly after the Republic's founding. But no dark side threat faced by the Order was as dangerous or as well known as the Dark Lords of the Sith. The Sith were the enemies of the Jedi for thousands of years, and the Great Wars fought between the two orders consumed the entire galaxy. In this week's entry in our series on the history of the Republic, we're going to be discussing the first of these terrible conflicts.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
When we last left the Republic, it wasn't doing too well. It was 10,966 years before the Battle of Yavin, and the galaxy was in chaos in the aftermath of the Pius Dea Crusades. The Crusaders had been defeated, their cathedral ships were adrift, lifeless, in the middle of nowhere, and Contispex 19, the last of their leaders, had been imprisoned for life on Kamas. The Jedi had led a coalition of renunciate heretics, Alsacani and Corellian separatists, and non-human rebels to victory. But in the process, much of the Republic had been destroyed, and it needed to be rebuilt. Fortunately, the Jedi stepped into the power vacuum left by the Pius Dea and put the Republic back together. The Grand Master of the Order, Beal Ductavis, replaced Contispex as the Supreme Chancellor, while the Jedi and Kamasi set about bridging divides between humans and non-humans all over the galaxy. Over the course of the Ductavis era, the Republic speedily recovered. By 10,000 BBY, it was ready to pick up where it had left off before the Pius Dea, continuing to expand and explore the galaxy. As explorers pushed the fringes of known space, a few more Alsacan conflicts occurred, and some new external threats emerged as well. In around 10,000 BBY, the young conqueror, Val Komori, conquered a few dozen planets on the edge of Republic space, declaring himself the ruler of the Komori Empire. Normally, the Republic would just quietly eliminate hostile factions like his, like swatting a mosquito. But Komori was a much more serious threat than the Republic usually faced. The Conqueror had a fleet of innovative new battleships equipped with powerful mass driver cannons, which took in asteroids and lobbed them at targets. These mass drivers could crack a warship in half with a single shot, and when fired at planets, they had the potential to devastate entire ecosystems. Despite his impressive new toys, Val Komori was quickly defeated by the Republic Navy, and his empire was absorbed into the Republic. But the legacy of his mass drivers endured. The Republic Navy copied Komori's designs, and mass drivers were used as terror weapons by both sides in the 10th Alsacan conflict a few centuries later. They were particularly notorious for their role in the Osara Municide, in which the Republic Navy bombed Osara, an Alsacani colony in the northern dependencies, to the point of lifelessness. This was the first equivalent of a base Delta Zero strike since the fall of the Rakata, and unfortunately, it was not the last either. It did, however, lead to more important technological developments. Planetary shields and turbo lasers were developed after the 10th Alsacan conflict, allowing planets to better defend themselves against bombardment in the future. The Ductavis era was followed up by the Reinatus period, which lasted from 9,000 to 8,000 BBY. Remembered for the 275-year long reign of revered Supreme Chancellor Blotus the Hutt, the Reinatus period saw the Republic expand southwards, discovering Malastare, and northwards, rounding off the northern dependencies. It was followed by the Subterra period, which lasted from 8,000 to 7,000 BBY, during which time the Republic faced several new threats. In 7,811 BBY, Republic scout ships in the northern dependencies encountered the Waymenti Hollow, a small alliance of factions opposed to Republic expansion. These factions were diverse, including the Sisters of the Machinesmith, the mercenary army of Whirlpoint 6, the Nests of Neshtab, the Wives of Tengrippa, and a few other alien races. But they all had the same goal: the destruction of the Republic. To that end, they had spent 1,000 years studying Republic military technology, improving on it in every possible way. After the first contact between the Republic and the Waymenti Hollow, war began, and right away, the Republic was seriously outmatched. That war was later named the Waymenti Storm, as it was both quick and terribly destructive. Waymenti ships poured into Republic space, destroying colonies across the northern dependencies and annihilating entire fleets of Republic warships. But the Republic fought back. It had the advantage of numbers, and more importantly, it had the advantage of spirit. Volunteers from RimWorlds affected by the conflict poured into the Republic military and fought the conquerors with unmatched courage. The Republic was able to grind the advance of Waymenti forces to a halt, and then, using Waymenti technology that had been reverse engineered in a secluded Axum shipyard, it began a counterattack. The battleships of the Republic Navy and the fearless rocket jumpers put an end to the Waymenti Storm by the end of the year, utterly destroying the Waymenti factions and conquering their worlds. The latest threat to the Republic was defeated, but a worse threat was just over the horizon. The Republic's greatest crisis came in 7003 BBY, this time from within. And no, we're not talking about another Alsacan conflict. This threat came from within the Jedi Order. Since the end of the Pius Dea Crusades, the Jedi Order had flourished. In those days, thousands of Jedi Knights roamed the galaxy, serving as watchmen for isolated planets or wandering heroes. At the same time, Jedi Masters gathered on Ossus, studying the Force in the peaceful seclusion of the Order's homeworld. The light of the Jedi seemed brighter than ever, but as we all know, the brighter the light gets, the darker its shadow becomes. The dark side was spreading within the ranks of the Order itself, and its adherents were more numerous than they had been for over 10,000 years. These Dark Jedi declared themselves and broke away from the Order in 7003 BBY, beginning the Second Great Schism. The Dark Jedi fled into wild space following their exile from the Order, and at first, the Jedi on Ossus were content to leave them there. But then reports began to trickle in about these Darksiders and what they were doing with their newfound powers. They had fallen so far into the Darkside's embrace that they had begun to use their powers to warp life itself, to use alchemy to mutate living creatures into terrible abominations bound to their will. The Dark Jedi had created the first of what would later be called Sith spawn. On top of this, they were attempting to take their powers a step further, studying how to use the dark side to mutate other sentients and extend their lives indefinitely. This left the Jedi with no choice. They had to go to war to stop their fallen brothers and the nightmarish monsters they were creating. Unlike in the First Great Schism, in which the rest of the galaxy took no part, the Jedi received the backing of the Republic military in this conflict. With both the full might of the Jedi Order and the Republic set against them, it seemed that the Dark Jedi would be easily defeated. Things weren't as they seemed, however. The Dark Jedi had known war was coming ever since their exile, and in the years before the war broke out, they had amassed a vast army of monsters. Unlike the last Great Schism, this war between Jedi wasn't over in a few months or even a few years. It lasted a full century, from 7,000 to 6,900 BBY, coming to be known as the 100-Year Darkness. In those terrible years, light and dark clashed all over the galaxy. Jedi and Dark Jedi fought in ferocious proto-saber duels, while entire colonies were consumed by battles between the Republic army and vast hordes of huge monsters and dark-side zombies. Dark Jedi proved to be more relentless than their enemies had bargained for, always fighting to the death. To make matters worse, their ranks were constantly bolstered by new defectors from within the Jedi Order. Despite this, the Jedi and the Republic initially had the advantage. The armies gathered by the rogues were animalistic and reckless, and after the initial shock of the first few battles, the forces of light had an easy time dispatching them. The Dark Jedi were pushed back beyond the frontier, and their numbers were slowly whittled down. Unwilling to give up, they responded by creating the worst monsters yet, the Leviathans. These massive reptilian beasts feasted on the souls of their victims, storing their life forces and accumulated knowledge in blister traps on their backs. The Dark Jedi unleashed them upon the galaxy, and so began a counterattack. But in the end, the Leviathans only bought the Dark Jedi a few decades. The Jedi recovered, and with the help of the Republic, they pushed the Darksiders back once again. Leviathans fell one by one to proto-sabers and Waymenti designed turbo lasers, and the numbers of Dark Jedi began to dwindle. By 6900 BBY, 100 years into the war, the Dark Jedi had been pushed back to the remote mining world Corbos, where they prepared for a last stand. The Battle of Corbos was the most terrible battle of the 100-year darkness. The cornered Dark Jedi unleashed the last of their monsters and Leviathans against the Jedi and their allies, killing thousands. But in the end, the Darksiders were only delaying the inevitable. After the last of their ships were destroyed in orbit, the Republic Navy used battleships based on Kumori designs to bombard Corbos from orbit, wiping out most of the remaining Dark Jedi and their monsters. Only 12 of their greatest champions survived, including the sorceress Sorza Sin, the formidable General Zozan, the gifted Admiral Remulus Dryper, the cunning warrior Karnes Moore, and Ajunta Pal, their leader. The Republic wanted to publicly execute these Dark Jedi, but the Jedi Order refused. The Jedi marched the Darksiders onto a drone-operated galleon and shot them out into the great beyond, hoping they would come to redemption on some distant world beyond the fringe. Instead, by fate or the Force, the vessel brought these 12 exiles to a desolate planet called Korriban. There, they discovered natives called Sith, a species of red-skinned humanoids strong in the Force and naturally inclined toward the dark side. The Sith were initially fearful of these outsiders, who they called the Jedi, but the exiles were nonetheless able to infiltrate their society. The Sith took them to Ziost, their frigid adopted homeworld, where the exiles won the trust of the Sith King Hakagram Graush. Then, Ajunta Pal betrayed and murdered Graush, claiming the throne of Ziost and rule over the Sith people. He and his followers seized control of Sith society, establishing an empire. In triumph, they claimed new titles for themselves, becoming the Dark Lords of the Sith. The Sith Lords would spend the next 2,000 years growing their empire, eagerly awaiting the day when they would strike back against the Jedi and the Republic. The story of that great war is one for another time, however, namely when we release the next entry on this series. But as usual guys, what do you think? Would you like a video on the story of this first Sith Empire? Let us know your thoughts and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.